On April 3, 1863, Sheriff Asa Whitlow rode to the Carter place at Sand Hollow in Wilcox County, Alabama, after a Union foraging party scorched the porch and burst the pantry door, leaving a family Bible half burned on a peg in a root cellar. Hatch thrown open to the dust. He found Enoch Carter, a broad man with a miner's shoulders, a daughter with a hair ribbon pinned wrong, and a field surgeon named Dr. Lucius Brand nursing a torn knuckle where he'd pried a ledger free from a saddlebag. The clerk from Camden, Ptolemy Griever, arrived slow with the county's lost birth book wrapped in tow, swearing it had never once left his desk. Tell me your city and the exact time on your clock right now. How many of the Carter births were never births at all, and how far did the eating go beyond the family fence? The Carter cellar held 17 steps cut in red clay, each lip worn to a half moon by bare feet. Midway down, 3 iron hooks sat in a beam as thick as a man's thigh, spaced so even you could hang kettles and keep their handles from touching. On the floor, a shallow bed of ash measured 4 inches deep from wall to wall, tamped smooth like a griddle. At its edge lay the pewter spoon, 7 inches from tip to bowl, stamped with a crooked CI. A lie and cold fat tang hung in the cellar. Names anchor this docket. Enoch Carter, patriarch. Sheriff Asa Whitlow, who counted more than he spoke. Dr. Lucius Brand, field surgeon who wrote quick and clean. Ptolemy Griever, the clerk whose book lost pages without tearing. Temperance Rook, Temrook, the midwife who kept her lines tight. Reverend Obed Farnham, who held a chapel key that fit more doors than it should. Salome Pike, neighbor whose eyes were better at dusk than dawn. Hiram Bozarth, deputy with a belt hole punched one too tight. And Ida Lurton, state chemist many years later, who wrote one word nobody liked to read. Whitlow began with numbers because numbers don't lie before men do. 17 steps, he wrote. 3 hooks, 4 inches of ash, 1 spoon 7 inches. He wrote 9, underlined, 9 generations by the Carter telling, traced in a scorched family Bible, whose last half had fused into a black brick that wouldn't open without a chisel. The field surgeon's ledger made the first clean cut through rumor. Brand had ridden with a Union detachment to scavenge corn and came away with names instead. His ledger showed a neat column: Parker Boy, Bayonet Nick, Nettles Farmhand, Shrapnel, Carter Child, Born Alive, Webbing at Fingers, Grandmother, Delivered, No outside man present. Farther down the page he had written, Bread made of pea flour, broth not meat, not bean, grease unknown. His hand never wasted ink on adjectives. Ptolemy. Griever stood in the Carter kitchen and opened his birth book to a cloth tab. This page that should have held 5 Carter entries had 2 lines and a ghost line in the fiber where a quill had once pressed and then been abraded out. He said, I never scratched a name, and then showed 3 corners clipped at the same angle, as if the book had been asked to swallow stubs. He put a fingernail to a watermark, as if watermarks could absolve him. Temrook brought what a man can't ignore. The midwife kept a palm-sized notebook under the hem of her bed, ticking off labor times, cord lengths, the color of the first breath. In her neat penciled hand she had written beside 4 Carter births, father not present, then struck not through once and wrote, said to be same. On another page she tallied season and drew 3 dots like the 3 iron hooks, a private code she didn't explain. Reverend Farnham had a chapel key and a habit of counting pew boards with his thumb when he lied. He brought a sack with a cup cut from a gourd, a bread paddle, a singed hymn leaf, and at the bottom, a strip of cloth with 3 buttonholes stitched clumsily through it. He said the strip tied a girl's hair. He said it like a man who'd learned the hard way that words rip when you pull too fast. Salome Pike said she'd watched the Carter Ridge in lean months. She saw lanterns move in a curve, 3 lights always, sweeping from the porch line to the smokehouse and down toward the root hatch like stars tracing a river bend. On the cold week after the hogs ran out, she counted those lights 5 nights, in a row. On the 6th, she found a pewter spoon in her fence weeds, 7 inches long, stamped with a bent C and sticky where a hand had palmed it wrong. Whitlow descended the 17 steps, with Brand behind him holding a candle stub. He touched each iron hook with his knuckle to hear its note. The first rang dull, the second thin, the third didn't ring at all. He pressed the spoon bowl into the ash bed and pulled it away. The ash held the shape like flour holds a finger. 4 inches is ash enough to hide bone fragments and keep the floor from telling what fell. Brand, kneeling at the hearth, splayed ash with 2 fingers. A flake caught light the way fat glints after it. Renders. He pressed it with his thumb. It powdered like chalk. He put a shaving in an envelope and wrote 1 line, calcined. He did not write human, not yet. He scraped with the spoon tip and uncovered a groove worn through ash to clay, 1/2 inch deep, as if liquid had found the same path again and again. The Bible on the peg still smoked at its leather, where the Union striker had yanked it from a nail. The first pages opened like a reluctant mouth. Names ran down. Asahel Carter, Sion Carter, Philomel Carter, Enoch Carter. Odd names for a small field, paired and doubled, the way a fence post is set beside a fence post when you worry one will rot. The binding had seared halfway, the births, after the fifth name had baked into a single black leaf. Griever swallowed and said, "My book has the missing 5. He turned a leaf and let Whitlow see where the county's hand ought to have written 5 dates. 3 were there, 2 erased like snow shoved off a board. The corner had a smudge of blue where a seal had touched wet. Whitlow touched the blue and left a fingerprint on his own skin. Tem Rook stood by the cellar door. She had delivered 3 of the Carter girls in a summer when Peaches failed. She said each girl carried the same old scar on her wrist as if she'd been tied there once and untied with care to avoid new marks. She opened her palm and showed a bit of twine with a knot the size of a dried pea, knotted 3 coils, her mark, for don't ask names. She slid it back in her sleeve. Deputy Hiram Bozarth, who'd once sold salt pork to the Carters for plow credit, found 3 mason jars on a shelf, chipped at the mouth and cleaned too hard. Each jar had a scrap of cloth under its lid. Each cloth carried a faint smoke shade as if something had burned just shy of flame inside. Bozarth set the jars on the floor, their bottoms left round ghost prints in ash, like moons set down and picked up. Reverend Farnham took his gourd cup and pressed it against the ash. When he lifted, a perfect circle took shape, and at its lip a shallow groove showed where something thin had been poured and had cut itself a little channel the way a creek etches a bank. He said, "Communion is a word you can break if you use it wrong." He put the cup away. Salome Pike spoke from the hatch, because she could not breathe down there long. She said the Carter lights did not sway like people carrying a lantern. They moved in a count. Porch light, smokehouse light, root hatch light, dark. She saw that pattern 3 winters running. On the last night she watched, when the lanterns died, the rooster cried twice and stopped. The next morning she found the spoon. Whitlow asked for the Bible with the fused back. He tapped the burned leather against the table and pried at the edge with his thumbnail until the fused half cracked. He lifted. The shock line split the family page like a river changes course. The early names peeled free, the later had become brick. He counted. 5 names free, then fused. He wrote brick in his book and drew a square. Brand opened the surgeon's ledger again and pointed at a line he had added after midnight, the night he slept in the Carter kitchen. Hearth ash, tamped even, child jaw fragment present, pewter, spoon length 7 inches. He had pressed the spoon bowl into the ash and drawn the outline in his ledger margin to scale. Next to the outline he wrote, "Bowl rim braided burr, used as scraper." Griever lifted his birth book like a shield. He asked if he could step to his wagon to fetch a second book that would show why he had clipped. Whitlow said, "Bring it." Griever went out and left the door open a hand's width. Bozarth followed him with his eyes, not his feet. On the peg where the Bible hung, the wood had polished bright where a brass corner had rubbed it for years. Tem Rook slid the knotted twine onto the table beside Salome's rag. The knot had 3 coils because Tim believed 3 coils were quick to tie and slow to cut. Whitlow wrote 3 and underlined it. He touched the rag. It left a faint mark like a handprint in flour. Farnham told what a man of God should not have to say out loud. He had once loaned a communion cup from his chapel to the Carters after Enoch argued that God does not mind if church comes to the sick. Farnham got the cup back a week later with a hairline crack, the gold plate flaking. He set the cup on the table now, and it made no noise when it touched wood, dead as a stone. He did not add opinions. He let the cup be proof enough. Bozarth handed Whitlow a folded paper he'd found under a sugar sack. A list of portions, 7 lines long. The last line read, "Bone to ash, grind, blend, salt." The handwriting was Enoch's. He made his B like a lean-to with a belly. Whitlow closed his fist around the paper until the edges cut his palm. Griever came back empty-handed, mouth full of dust and a new lie. He said his second book had gone missing in the raid. No soldier had opened his wagon. He sat down and folded his hands on his knees like a schoolboy told to wait. Whitlow wrote, "Book gone," then didn't cross it because crossing it would make it a fact. Brand pulled a clay plug from the hearth line where the ash bed met the wall. Behind it, a vent burrowed into dirt, wide as a hand, angling up toward the yard. The dirt at the vent's lip showed a sheen where old-world soap leaves a slick. Brand ran the spoon shaft into the burrow and marked 7 inches to the bowl. The shaft reached only halfway. Whatever had flowed hadn't needed a deep pipe. It had needed a path. Whitlow ordered the cellar hatch sealed for the night with 3 nails and tied white rags on the nail heads, so he could tell if hands had worried them. He took the spoon and the ash, shaving into town with him, and left Bozarth to sit on the Carter porch with his belt tightened to keep him awake. The next morning, Griever stood in the courthouse with his birth book on the clerk's desk, and Whitlow bent the page corners backward to see what had been erased. The paper fibers showed tracks where a blade had lifted letters thin by thin. Between the tracks, ash had caught as if a belt of dust hung on the page, Maker's hand marked by the same gray that lay 4 inches deep in the Carter cellar. Brand moved his ledger from saddlebag to desk and circled the word calcined twice. He had no test to make human certain in 1863. He did the next best thing. He affixed to his ledger an envelope with 2 fragments folded in paper torn from the back of a hymn book and wrote across the flap, "For the sheriff's diary to hold until proven." Reverend Farnham brought his cracked cup to the courthouse and laid it on the plank table where a judge had once split a will. He placed beside it the hymn leaf with the grease moonlets arranged in an arc. Whitlow leaned forward and matched the cup's rim to the crescent smudges. The fit held. Tem Rook walked in with a clean apron and a small knife wrapped in cloth. The knife was bone-handled, narrow, with a notch an inch from the point where stone had taught the edge a habit. She said she had cut more cords with that knife than she had cut bread. She set it beside the spoon. The blade carried a gray ghost along its belly, as if it had drawn through ash once for luck. Salome Pike sat at the back and kept her mouth shut until Whitlow called her. Then she said only 3 lights, 5 nights, 1 hymn, 1 rag, and put the rag down like a flag. She had washed that rag twice and could not lift the stain. She did not try again. The public scene happened then because a county gets one chance to decide what it will ignore. Whitlow opened the courtroom shutters and let dirt light in. He placed 6 objects on the table where men had argued over mules and fences: the 7-inch pewter spoon stamped with a crooked C, Dr. Brand's envelope sealed to his ledger flap, the cracked communion cup from Farnham's chapel, Salome's rag with 3 grease pans, Tem Rook's bone-handled knife with the ash gloss along its belly, and Griever's birth book open to the scraped thin lines where 2 Carter births should have lived. A lion-cold tallow edge rode the air while the room held its breath. Reverend Farnham did not climb the dais. He stood to the side and folded his hands at his waist. Dr. Brand removed his hat. Griever flinched when the spoon touched the ledger envelope. Bozarth took 2 steps left to block the door. Enoch Carter stood in the back with his arms flat at his sides, elbows locked. Whitlow pressed the spoon bowl into a pan of sifted ash he had brought from the cellar and lifted. A perfect spoon print rose and then settled. He tapped the spoon against the rim once. The sound thunked like bone. He poured a trickle of water along the pan's edge and watched a thread cut a groove through ash to the same place the spoon print had pulled from. He did not name the groove. He let it be a line. Then he said the only sentence that stopped the room: "You do not make a family with a cup." No one had a hymn ready after that. They stood and did their counting and their heads instead. Whitlow wrote that line in his diary that night because he did not trust only his nose. He described the 17 steps again. He traced the spoon bowl. He sketched the 3 hooks in a row and measured their gaps with the edge of his page. On the back leaf, he tucked Brand's envelope with the ash flakes and glued it with wheat paste along the flap. He wrote across the paste, "Sheriff's seal, do not open." Bozarth walked the yard by moon, counting paces between the smokehouse and the hatch. He set pebbles at 3 spots to measure if feet disturbed the dirt. In the morning, 2 pebbles had moved half an inch and 1 had flipped. He could not say if a man had done it or a dog. He wrote half and 1 on his own palm to keep the memory honest. Griever came to the courthouse early with his hair damp and asked if he might copy from the sheriff's diary the line that had called his book into question: "For balance." Whitlow said no. Griever stood by the window and watched a wasp walk the sash. When Whitlow looked at his desk again, the diary lay open and the envelope's corner was bent. The paste line was intact. The corner was bent anyway. Brand rode back to the Carter place at mid-morning to take one more look before calling it a day. He dug his thumb on the inside of the hearth and found meat smoke in the soot, as usual for a farm. He pressed deeper and found a sandy grit that had not lived there before. He wiped it with a linen square and knocked the grit into a vial. He sealed the cork with his own candle wax and scratched 3 lines across the wax with his knife so he'd know if someone warmed and reseated it. Tem Rook brought Whitlow a slip of brown paper with a number. 2 little ones buried before hair grew, one in a girl's arms. She had written this under a calendar she kept tucked behind her stove, where steam curled the paper. The number had a drop of grease near it. The grease had caught ash, making a smudge like a thumbprint left on a pane. Farnham nailed a second lock on his chapel door, though it was an insult to doors and locks. He kept the cracked cup in a drawer and put the key on a string round his neck. He found himself counting the length of that string twice a day, like a man patting a pocket. He doesn't trust. He told no one. He told God less. Salome Pike went home by the sycamore and looked at the ground out of habit. She found 3 beads in the dirt, bone or clay, white as old teeth, threaded on a bit of horsehair. She brought them to Whitlow in her apron. He set them next to the spoon and chose not to write what they looked like. He wrote 3 beads. He let the shape be what it was. Weeks later, when the county quieted enough to be cruel again, Whitlow sealed his diary inside his desk and locked it. He carried the key with his tobacco in a little horn. He wrote, "To be opened when proof," fits on a slip, and stuck it under the horn with a tack. He meant to outweight something he didn't know how to fight head on. You can call the Carters a fortress of blood and be done. You can also count the hands that made the fortress possible. Griever's clipped corners, Farnham's borrowed cup, Tem Rook's notes written under her bed because she had nowhere else to put them. Brand's envelope glued to a page a curious clerk tried to lift with fingernails. Bozarth's pebbles moved a half-inch, Salome's spoon in the fence weeds. No one person made the 4-inch ash bed. It gathered itself by habit. Enoch Carter left the county 2 winters later when the bean crop failed and the hogs got thin. He sold the house to a cousin who looked like an older version of his youngest boy. Prices wrote themselves shy in the ledger. A bed for $3, a wagon for $2, a Bible listed as scorched unfit. The cousin took the hooks and left the steps. He filled the ash bed with dirt a foot deep and planted onions. They yellowed. At the tips in a week, Tem Rook added 3 lines to her notebook. Girl bled in winter, stopped in lean time, started after broth. She did not write what broth. She drew a small circle and 3 dots beside it and closed the book. She kept it under her pillow after that and slept badly. Reverend Farnham wrote one sermon that did not mention God by name. He read a list of numbers, 17, 3, 4, 7, 9. He matched each number to an object without naming the house that made them. He said, "A number is a nail. What you hang on it is your fault." Then he closed the book and sang alone until his voice cracked. Brand took his vial to a chemistry. A man in Mobile once the road was safer. The man warmed the ash on a skillet and sniffed. He said little. He tasted a pinch on the tip of his tongue like an old miner does to tell chalk from lime. He shook his head. He wrote nothing. Brand put the vial in his ledger pocket and wrote, "One day, a better test." Salome Pike died in a spring that broke late. Her niece shook out the apron her aunt had used to carry the rag and the beads, and the apron coughed up a spoon bowl dent that had been hiding in a seam. The niece took the dent to Whitlow. He matched it to the spoon on his desk. The match was not science. It was a woman's sense that 2 things fit the same family. He believed her. Years ate the Carters one by one without paper following. The cousin fathered a son who married a cousin in Talladega, who wore her hair the same way a Carter girl had, tied low with a strip that left 3 lines on her neck. People noticed and pretended they hadn't. Ptolemy Griever retired to a house with a porch that faced the river, took his birth book with him to keep, and died with the book under his bed. Some pages had gone smooth like slate. Whitlow's diary stayed shut under its paste until years would bring a test. He said it in a strongbox when news came from Montgomery of a state chemist who could name ash from bone without boasting. He wrote a note to himself on the strongbox lid, "For Ida Lurton," and he folded Brand's envelope into a second envelope so a clerk's curiosity could not enter without leaving proof. Obed Farnham outlived his cup. The crack widened until the rim gave and a piece fell off and cut his finger. He wrapped the cut with a bit of clean muslin and bled through it in a spot the size of a coin. He kept the muslin. He did not wash it. He put it in the drawer with the cup and closed the drawer. When he died, the drawer key was no longer on his string. Tem Rook put her notebook into a wall when her hand got shaky. She pried a loose board behind her stove and slid the book into the space where heat would keep the paper dry and ash would make a film on the page. She covered the gap with a tin lid and stacked sticks of fatwood against it. She told no one because she had learned that telling makes men act wrong. Bozarth married late and kept a shelf of oddities. Buttons with 2 corners melted, ball shot flattened by bone, a spoon with its handle snapped at the neck and filed smooth. Again. He told his boy only one thing worth repeating. "You count a house by what it hides," he said, and touched the spoon. Brand rode off into his own end. He left the ledger behind at the courthouse when he knew he wouldn't cross back through. The envelope with the ash fragments yellowed along the fold where paste had dried. A clerk put a ribbon around the ledger and set it on a shelf next to. A tax book and a box of receipts stuck with mouse droppings. Time does not honor neat hands forever. Then the second date came because a county, if it's lucky, gets exactly 2. On November 12, 1937, Ida Lurton, state chemist in Montgomery who had a way of writing plain, opened Whitlow's strongbox with a locksmith watching. She cut the paste with a butter knife heated by a kettle's steam and lifted Bran's envelope with the ash flakes inside. She spooned a shaving into a dish and heated it over a coil until the room took on a singed edge. She wrote 4 words on a slip and signed her name. Calcined human bone present. The slip went back into the strongbox with the diary. Someone added a tag in a soft pencil for microfilm, and someone else wrote later under it. Later took its time. A man who keeps a diary always leaves a door for a thief. Whitlow had written, "Do not open," across his paste. He had also written a paragraph about Griever's hands in the room the day the corner bent. After Whitlow died, Griever's nephew came to file a deed and asked to see the old sheriff's book. The clerk said no. 2 days later, the diary sat 6 inches to the left on the strongbox shelf. The paste now had a hairline like a smile someone tried to erase. Reverend Farnham's cracked cup found its way to a church closet with a broken tambourine and an old lintel measuring rod. A child playing hide-and-seek knocked the cup off its shelf. The cup hit the floor and broke clean in 2. The child cried. The mother said, "It was already broken." She swept the pieces into a box with string and paper. The box sank to the bottom of a stack for a decade. Salome's spoon rode from drawer to drawer until a niece sold a box of kitchen things to a peddler who didn't care about stamps or crooked letters. The peddler traded the spoon for a sack of peas and a length of blue calico. The calico looked exactly like the tie that had bound the Carter Bible to its peg when a soldier pulled it down. Whitlow would have seen the rhyme and flinched. The peddler didn't. Tem Rook's notebook behind her stove outlasted the plaster and the fat wood. A grandson prying up boards to lay a pipe found the tin lid, pulled it, and held the book by a corner so it wouldn't tear. 3 pages had stuck together where steam had kissed them. The writing under the stuck places had bled and blurred, but the numbers read clean. 3 dots by a circle, 3 births in 1/2 year, 3 graves in 1 winter that did not involve church. Bran's ledger finally went to microfilm in Sirzum, a burst of tiding. The clerk fed the pages through a camera and wrote frame numbers that used to stand for weddings and plow sales. Frame 16, a list of forage notes and a man named Nettles. Frame 17, the spoon outline and the word calcined. Frame 18, a blank where a paperclip had caught and flipped the page too fast. The clerk made a note to refilm later. Later, again, did not hurry. If you want the count in one place, here it is. The Carters ran a closed bloodline through 9 generations by their own family names, and turned hunger into ritual in a root cellar chapel with 17 steps down, 3 iron hooks to hold kettles, a 4-inch ash bed tamped even, and a 7-inch pewter spoon stamped with a crooked C that doubled as a scraper. A field surgeon's ledger described a jaw fragment in that ash. A clerk's birth book lost 2 Carter lines by scraping, not tearing. A midwife's notebook hid 3 dots by a circle where a father's name wanted to live. A minister's cracked cup matched grease crescents on a hymn leaf. A neighbor's rag held 3 bands of fat. A sheriff's diary sealed an envelope with ash flakes and later received, on that second date, a chemist's slip reading, "Calcined human bone present." Now the 2 questions we owe the dead and the living both. If everyone who entered that cellar learned the same 4 numbers by heart, why did no one count to 1 sooner and close the hatch? If the air ever carried soap ash and cooled grease and we still called it bread, what does that say about the hands that kept passing the cup? The last image belongs to now because ink travels further than feet. When a volunteer set the microfilm from the courthouse on a reader last year and cranked through the Carter frames, they found a sequence tidy enough to shame memory. Frame 16 showed Bran's ledger page neat as a hymn line. Frame 17 should have shown Whitlow's diary with the envelope flap glued and the words "Do not open" scored in pencil. Instead, the frame carried a gray veil, a smear like thin milk across glass, and the edge of a slip just visible where someone had typed the word that outlived the county, indeterminate. In the grain at the bottom rim, a faint arc caught. The light, half shadow, half scratch, suggesting the soft curve of a child's jaw set into powder.